So you gotta ask, why is Tech Tim out here in the parking lot with a bone stock JK Flex on a forklift? Well, maybe we figured it would be a good time to show you what a performance suspension will do. So, we've got this 2012 JK and it's bone stock. It's got 33-inch BFGs on it. That's it. Lifted up the front tire until the back tire just lost contact with the ground. And that tire's coming up 17 3/4 of an inch. Now we're going to go into the shop and we're going to install a 3-inch EVO Manufacturing suspension. Then we'll see what it does. All right, we got our baseline measurements done. And of course, you know we always do this with all our lifts. We want to know what our before and after measurements are, because that'll tell us not only how much lift did we get exactly, but also in the future if we make any other changes or if we notice something different after a wheeling trip. Let me show you what we're installing. So here's the hardware. This is an EVO Manufacturing Enforcer 3-inch lift kit, stage 1. With a set of Fox 2.0 reservoir shocks. Now, the big difference in the stages on the EVO Manufacturing kits is the arms. The stage 1 kit comes with a set of lower front control arms only. These have the high flex Johnny joints in both ends, and this is one of the things that's going to give us a lot of flex in this JK. Another thing that's going to give us flex, of course, we have a taller spring. We're putting a taller spring in that'll allow it to not only compress a little bit more, but also allow it to flex or stretch out farther in droop. And then our shocks. With the shocks, we went with the 2.0 Fox, which Fox shocks have always been a premium shock. We know they're going to ride great on-road and they're going to work great off-road. We do like to go spirited driving a little bit, so having the reservoirs will help keep that shock fade to a minimum. And we also took measurements of our shocks and the shocks that EVO Manufacturing recommended to put in their kit. And where the Fox shocks are available in a couple different sizes, we chose the 4-inch to 6-inch lift Fox shocks, and they fall right within the range of the EVO Manufacturing 3-inch lift shock recommended lengths. So that's one thing that you might want to take a look at. Another bonus of going to the Fox reservoir shocks is the reservoir shock, the internals are just a little bit different, and Fox can actually free up more travel. The reservoir Fox 2.0 shocks actually have a little bit more travel than what the non-reservoir shocks have. So if you're interested in maximizing the travel for your suspension, one of the things you can do is make sure that you maximize the shock length for your suspension, and then even look at the various shocks in that shock line you're interested in, see if you can't get a shock that'll travel a little bit more within the same package. Now, we've got the kit laid out. Let's get it under to this Jeep. We weren't going to show you step by step because, well, you've seen it before. But to drop that axle, all we have to do is disconnect the shocks. Actually, because we have new shocks to go in, we're going to pull these out. We're also going to pull out the SWAYBAR links. We want to pop the bolts on our brake lines. Even though we will be replacing those, we're going to wait for the brake lines till the very end. You also need to wiggle your parking brake cables out of the little wire tabs up above. And of course, we're going to start by pulling the track bar bolt. Now we can drop it down far enough, we'll be able to get those lift springs in. Really, there we go. Now we do have to do a little trimming to install this EVO kit on this JK. The rear track bar bracket, it's going to sit right up in here. We have to remove the outer portion of the factory track bar bracket. So we're just going to come in and slice right along the top here, slice down here. And then this will slide in and bolt in place. As you can see how fast it cut, it's a pretty thin bracket, which is why they have you eliminate it and put a much beefier bracket in. Hey, I'm throwing stuff at Brienne. Now our track bar bracket will slip right into place and use the supplied hardware to bolt it in. Now you got to fish the nut down in through the back through a slot, and one little trick is to take some painter's tape and slip across your wrench, and then we can put the nut on there and then reach that nut in through the slot. With the rear pretty much done, we're gonna move on to the front, and I've already pulled the track bar bolt, but now we need to pull the bolts out of the drive line. Let's loosen the control arm bolts a little bit and pull the shocks. That'll help drop that front axle so we can get those springs out. On the passenger side, we've got this plastic right here that's in the way. We have a fix. Die grinder. Now with that access slot, we're able to get the old one out, and it'll make it a lot easier to get the new shock in. Now we just need to drop the axle a little bit more. The brake line is what's holding us up, so 10mm wrench right down on the coil bucket, and we can pull the little bracket out, and then that'll free up a lot more travel on the brake line. So now it's time to pull the factory lower control arms, because we have those really cool EVO Manufacturing lower control arms, and we're just going to replace the arms one side at a time. Make sure you have the axle solidly supported, because once we pull that arm off, it's going to want to move. There's the factory arm. Let's take a look to see what the difference between the factory and the new EVO Manufacturing arms are. Okay, here's the factory arm. 6.7 pounds. And here is the heavy duty EVO Manufacturing arm at 14 pounds, so more than double the weight. More weight means more material, a lot stronger. All right, now let's open one of these arms up and see how thick it is. As you can see, those factory arms don't have a very thick wall. This is why you see them bent and damaged from scraping over rocks. We're not going to see that problem with those massive EVO Manufacturing arms. Now before we install these, we want to set our length. These are adjustable. And with a 3-inch lift, we want to go eye to eye. 23 1/4 is what we found is a great starting point. And that'll give us about 6 degrees of caster. So right now we're sitting at 23. So 23 1/4. And when we set one arm, let's double check them to make sure that they match. All right, so if you look closely, the pinch bolt here is interfering with the bracket on the axle, and also as we get it up higher, the adjusting nut's going to interfere with the sheet metal. So we want to get in here with a flapper disc or a grinder and take some of this sheet metal out. Okay, so I've got those fully tightened. Now that's one of the big differences with the EVO Manufacturing arms with the Johnny joints. It's because inside that Johnny joint is a ball that fully rotates. It'll rotate 360 degrees. So we can torque down the suspension bolts 100%. With an arm that has a static bushing, you have to wait till the suspension is at static height before you torque them down. Either that, or if you torque it down at full droop, and you start setting it down, the axle comes up. Now that bushing's twisting inside and is fighting itself, or fighting the suspension, trying to unload. So it could actually cause handling issues. With the Johnny joints on the EVO Manufacturing arms, no problem. Tighten them down while they're up in the air and you can get at them easy. So when it comes to the bump stops on a JK, we need to set them in place. And I'm just using a transfer punch. Now we can use a little rapid tap or any other lube and just lube that hole up. And then we're using a 3/8/16 tap. Now EVO does include self-tapping screws, but we like to just tap the hole just to get a little easier bite, and then we can run a nut up underneath just to make sure it is locked in. For the bump stop spacer, I've zip tied it inside the coil. It'll hold it up out of the way while we get the coil in the vehicle. So take a look at that brake fluid. This rig hasn't had its brake fluid changed in a long time, and you can see it's all dirty and it's probably got quite a bit of moisture in it. That brake fluid should be nice and clear, so definitely time for a flush on this particular Jeep. Now on these pin type mounts, where you just have the pin and you have the two bushings kind of sandwiched down in, these bushings need to flex a little bit. So don't just tighten that nut all the way down until those bushings are solid. Because as the axle moves underneath the vehicle, especially at full droop, this shock needs to move back and forth around on that pin. So what you want to do is just start tightening them down, and then once those bushings touch, pay attention to the sides of the bushings. And as soon as they bulge just a tiny amount, that's enough preload. We have a little Loctite on the threads, and there's also a nylock nut on top, so it's going to lock it in place if you have everything clean. So just make sure that you don't over tighten it to allow that shock pin or the bushings to allow that shock pin to move a little bit. So there it is with that longer Fox shock and fully drooped out, our 3-inch coil is just a little loose. Now, it's definitely going to be an issue in the front in that we don't want that coil to get loose off-road and then spin out of the little pigtail pocket. So we want to make sure we're planted in there. To fix it, we're using these little coil retainers, and we had to drill and tap the coil bucket itself to accept a bolt. And we can just screw this down in. So now with the end of that pigtail locked down, the spring's definitely secured. It's loose up here. We might notice something when we're off-road and we're fully articulated out, but you probably won't notice much. It's going to give us a lot more travel going with this longer shock. Now, we could put a little trim packer up in here or another spacer just to kind of space it down to give a little preload on that coil, but then that's just going to give us more height, and we already have a 3-inch coil. We don't want to get any taller. 3-inch lift is going to be plenty for what we want to do, and it'll keep our center of gravity low. So this is what we're going to run. So here's another issue we have with lifts. Once you get above that 1.5-inch lift range, you run into a problem with the drive shaft contacting the exhaust. Now with those longer travel shocks, it's really drooping out, and so we can do the traditional exhaust spacers, but don't think that's going to give us enough to get the drive shaft all the way down to the pinion. So we're probably going to have to be looking at a new front drive shaft. We've got the exhaust spacer kit in on both sides and dropped that crossover pipe. And if we look at the drive shaft, we're still a ways away from hooking up at the pinion. We're binding in two places. One is the rubber boot is on that crossover pipe. And then if we go up and take a look at the CV joint, you can see where the shaft is actually binding on the metal retainer for the CV boot. That's going to be an issue. So we've got more mods to do with the front drive shaft. Okay, the lift is done. The JK's out in the parking lot and in the sun. We've got our after measurements, and we came up with just about 5 inches of lift in the front and 4 inches of lift in the back. Now that may seem like a lot considering we've only put a 3-inch kit in, but there's two things to consider. One, it's brand new, hasn't been flexed at all. After a couple trips off-road, these springs are definitely going to settle some. That's one of the reasons why we take these measurements, so we know exactly what the suspension's doing. Another thing you got to consider is when a manufacturer builds a lift kit, they're going to build it for the average vehicle. For a JK, that's going to be a hardtop, full doors, and they're planning for you to have some extra gear in it. This is about a lightweight of a 4-door JK as you can get. It's a 4-door, half door, and a soft top. We also don't have a lot of gear on this. It's got a bumper and a winch on the front. That's the only thing weighing it down. So we're going to sit higher than a fully loaded 4-door with a hardtop. Now, what you're probably wanting to know is how much articulation did we gain just by bolting in a higher performance suspension. Let's bring the forklift over. Keep going. Right there. So it's almost disappointing in that we went from an 18-inch or 17 3/4 to, you know what, I'm gonna double check this. Yeah, measuring a second time, we only have 20.5 inches. So we gained about 3 inches of suspension travel with that high performance suspension. But we have a big caveat here. The front sway bar is still connected. That's gonna free up a ton of travel. So let's make a quick adjustment. Go ahead and drop it. Right there. Now that's more like it. That's what we were expecting with a high performance suspension. Lots of articulation, lots of flex. And that's gonna help those tires stay in contact with the uneven terrain, giving you more traction. So let's get this measurement done. And we're right about 33 3/4 of an inch. Compare that to the stock suspension, it's about a 16-inch difference in flex. Yeah, we could have got a little bit more travel had we disconnected the sway bar links with that factory suspension, but we wouldn't have got this kind of flex. Now, obviously, we're gonna have to do something with the sway bar to be able to utilize this flex off-road. And there are a few choices. We could do the anti-rock sway bars by Rock Jock. We could do sway bar disconnects, and there are other options. One we're gonna show you in an upcoming video. So stay tuned, continue watching. We will have more videos of this JK as we gain more flex, get it to perform off-road the best we can. And of course, the first start is a very compliant suspension. So check the description box down below to where you can find these products we used on this for this lift at Northrige 4x4, including that EVO Manufacturing Enforcer Stage 1 lift kit. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification, because, well, with more subscribers, we can do more content like this. Hit that like button and leave us a comment. What do you think about the flex we got out of this JK? Pretty impressive. So until next time, thanks, Northridge Nation. Now, there is one thing I forgot to address, and that is making changes to a standardized suspension package. We went with a longer shock, which will give us more travel, help us off-road, but that could create other issues, as you saw earlier in the video where we had the drive shaft issues. So keep in mind, anytime you make changes, it may affect other things. But for right now, we want to get this back in. I mean, with that lift, it's time to put some real tires on.